Hello, welcome to the Thinkers50 Radar 2023 series brought to you in partnership with Deloitte. I'm Stuart Craner, co-founder of Thinkers50. For more than 20 years, Thinkers50 has been identifying, ranking and sharing extraordinary business and management ideas. Every January, we announce 30 management and business thinkers to watch in the coming year. These are the new and exciting voices of management. The result for 2023 is an eclectic group of people who we believe will make an impact with their ideas, their campaigning, their research, and their passion in the coming 12 months. More than that, by showcasing their ideas, we hope they will be inspired to carry the torch for management thinking in the years ahead. They don't have all the answers, but they are asking important questions. And talking of questions, we welcome yours. Please let us know where you are joining from today and send over your thoughts, questions, queries, insights, comments at any time during the session. Today, we are delighted to be joined by one of those exciting new voices. He is Mikko Ketokivi. Mikko is a professor of operations management and organization design at IE Business School and co-author of Efficient Organization, a book with Joe Mahoney. Mikko's approach has been described as a combination of economics, sociology, psychology, management, philosophy, and statistics. In addition to the substantive topics of operations management and organization design, he specializes in methodology, research design, the analysis of complex statistical data, measurement, reasoning, scientific rhetoric, and argumentation. So there should be plenty to talk about. Mikko, welcome.
Thank you so much, Stuart, and very happy to be included in the class of 23.
You're very, very welcome. And what is the golden thread that runs through your work that enables you to explain what it is you do?
Okay, well, I steal most of my ideas, so I was never very good at anything specific. So I thought if I try out a lot of stuff. So joking aside, let me quote one of my intellectual superheroes, Oliver Williamson, who was the Nobel laureate in economics in 2009. He said in an interview in 1990 something really profound. So let me just state the quote and then comment on it. So he said, "The world should not be organized to the advantage of the opportunistic against those who are more inclined to keep their promises." And that idea has really resonated with me even when I was a child back in Vaasa, Finland. I grew up in a one-horse town. There was one traffic light, I might add. But this idea of how do we organize the world? And then, of course, how do we organize firms? How do we organize any cooperative value-creating effort? And how do we do it in a way that encourages the honest and discourages the opportunistic? So that's been my kind of a common thread in everything that I've done. And now the book with Joe is kind of one culmination of that, hands down the most important piece of written work in my career so far. Hopefully there will be more.
The opportunistic are usually encouraged.
Yes, I mean, if you look at what happens in this world, yeah, I'm discouraged every day, but I try not to let it get me down. Do something about it. Try to improve things, even at the margin. You know, maybe not revolutionary changes, but ideas that, if we can tilt the direction just a couple degrees, then let's see where will we end up in 20 years. But yes, there are too many things out there in the world to be pessimistic about, but we need to fight it.
Thank you for the people who've already joined us. I see Peter Bryant. Good to see you, Peter, from Australia. People from America, Denmark, Finland, Portugal, India, Holland, Switzerland, and elsewhere. Mikko, what does it mean for an organization to be efficient? Let's get back to the basics of this. So what does it mean?
Okay, yeah. So, well, this is something I do with all my classes. So when I teach organization design and governance, I start with a free association. So let me do it with you and the audience today. When I say the word efficiency, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Boring processes. There's quite a lot.
Boring process. Yeah. Boring process. Yeah. Efficient processes are often boring. They're boring because they're efficient. Okay. So when I do this with students, I ask them, and then I look at all the things that they write. So if we're on Zoom, they write in the chat box, and I look at the first thing I pay attention to is the connotation, the first thought, positive or negative. And I'm happy to report that in the vast majority of cases, the first connotation is positive. So efficiency is a good thing. And this brings me to my definition. Again, I stole this from someone else. So Frank Knight, who was an economist, wrote already in the 1940s about this. He said that efficiency is the avoidance of waste. So think of any activity and then think of ways by which you can seek to avoid waste. That's the basic idea. And certainly avoiding waste of time or waste of money seems salient. But how about the idea that sometimes communication can be wasted? When was the last time you had to send the third or fourth reminder email to someone who hasn't? You're wasting communication. Those who design robots know that often movement can be wasted. Okay. And when I was playing basketball many, many years ago, I had a couple of very good coaches who were very good at eliminating waste of movement as you're shooting foul shots or dribbling, doing only that which is necessary and nothing more. So I really want to emphasize the positive connotation, that efficiency in both, because there are plenty of negative connotations as well, but I'm only interested in them insofar as we can get rid of them.
I suppose the negativity goes back to Frederick Taylor and scientific management at the beginning of the 20th century and the legacy of that interpretation of efficiency, which was...
Yeah, I think interpretations, I would say Taylorism in many ways was about positive efficiency. But then, it's funny how foundational ideas, they kind of get distorted. People turn them on their head. Saying the name Milton Friedman makes most people vomit in their mouths. But if you actually look at what Milton Friedman wrote about, very insightful. But the only thing we kind of remember from him was him saying that the social responsibility of business is to make profits. But there's so much more to that, and what he said, what he meant, what he wanted us to think about. So it's these distortions that, of course, I as an educator try then to remedy when I teach or design, whether it's to the MBAs or bachelors or PhDs. I always want to make sure that we understand what the foundational messages are. And they're almost without exception positive.
So avoidance of waste equates with seeking efficiency in your
yeah, I almost think of them as synonymous. If you want to seek efficiency in an activity, whether it's brushing teeth or recycling your garbage or running the final assembly plant of tractors, you want to think of, where could I improve? Where am I wasting time, money, attention, movement, resources, whatnot, and then ask, how could I redesign this? Sometimes excessive inventories can be a form of waste, because that's a real cost. Inventory carrying cost is a real cost. And, having too much most manufacturing operations need at least some, even so-called just in time. But what you want to do is make sure that you don't have any more than what you need. So that's the idea. Yeah, so I would equate efficiency with avoidance of waste in all its forms.
And what you were saying a couple of minutes ago about simplicity is interesting. So you're equating with this avoidance of waste and efficiency with an addiction to simplicity, or a propensity for simplicity. Like the great artists you look at the way Picasso draws a couple of lines and what he can do with that, or great football.
Mhm.
Lionel Messi doesn't do anything complicated, really.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's doing nothing unnecessary. Okay, so when I played basketball in high school, I had one coach when I lived in the U.S. You know, sometimes when you're dribbling the ball, you dribble the ball between your legs. You know, often just to show off your girlfriend or whatnot. I had a coach who would bench you every time you did that, because he said there is no reason for you to do that. You know, if you dribble the ball between your legs, I'm going to bench you right away. And his lesson to us was, don't do anything unnecessary. So this is the basic idea. You know, so if you look at watch a basketball game, yeah, even professional players, they do that all the time. But my coach said, you know, this is a no-no. This is inefficiency. You're doing something you don't need to do. And that stuck with me. That was 1987. So that coach and his lessons have stuck with me for a long time.
And is that what happens in organizations? People are dribbling the ball between their legs continually. There's a level of indulgence.
I don't know if it is indulgence, but I think that a lot of this, and this is what Joe and I call in the book institutionalized waste. So things that we do as matter of organizational routine that are wasteful, but we either don't realize it, or we realize it but we don't care, or we realize we care but are unable to do something about it. So this is a lot of the efficiency distortions, if you will, can be found in very large organizations that are kind of set in their ways and are very difficult to change. So highly routinized behavior is incredibly difficult to change.
And is there a sense that organizations regard themselves as efficient enough? They're not driven. Large organizations tend not to be driven by efficiency. They're driven by other things,
Yeah,
habitual behavior as much as anything.
if you are an extremely powerful organization, then you don't have to worry about efficiency as much. Okay? Because if you're powerful, if you're the big kid on the block, then you can call the shots. And I could name many contexts in which I am troubled by the inefficiencies that large incumbents kind of bring to the marketplace. And of course, there's a lot of research on this as well, done for 20, 30 years. But let me make a point here about the word organization. So when I say organization, you may be thinking of a firm or a legislature or the World Bank or something. When I think of efficiency, I think of the efficiency of a relationship. And this is really a well-established premise in organizational economics, that we don't take the firm or the organization, but a specific relationship as the unit of analysis. So if you ask me, Mikko, what interests you in HP, the company HP? I would say, without blinking, its relationship with Intel. I'd be really interested in knowing the details of how HP and Intel organize their relationship, which is characterized by incredibly high bilateral dependency. What kinds of contracts do they have? What kinds of termination clauses are in these contracts? How do they structure the governance of the relationship? So the question is not whether a firm is efficient, but whether a form of cooperation is organized efficiently. And that opens really interesting questions about the nature of efficiency. It's really about, Stuart, you and me collaborating. You're my supplier, I'm the final assembler. Is our relationship organized efficiently?
Yeah, I can see that's a different way of looking at it. Some comments from people listening and watching. Laurie says, how do you see efficiency, and how does efficiency relate to good quality? Are those even siblings? Frank Karlberg has helpfully provided an answer from ChatGPT, but I'm not sure ChatGPT has the answer to everything. So what's the relationship between efficiency and quality in your mind, Mikko?
Okay, very good, interesting question from Laura, who is actually a distant relative of mine. So good to see you, Laura. So quality and efficiency, first of all, they're not the same thing, because the way you and I organize, let's say that I'm the final assembler of automobiles and you are the supplier of, let's say, seats. And I really want you to locate your seat assembly plant right next to my final assembly plant so that you can ship your seats to my final assembly plant just in time and in sequence, because they have to come in a specific sequence. So, of course, there is the presumption that the quality of the seats and the quality of the automobile, that the quality is intact. Now, the question is, how efficiently do we organize our collaboration so that you get the seats that I need from you exactly when I need them in the sequence that I need them? And also, I'm asking you to co-locate your seat assembly plant right next to my final assembly plant. So you're making a massive relation-specific investment. So one of the questions of efficient contracting is, how do I ensure that you're willing to make that investment? So yeah, I would say that yes, efficiency and quality, they are different things, but they are clearly, related and complementary. And of course, if quality is not intact, then we should focus on efficiency. Well, get quality right first, then start tuning the organization or the relationship. Absolutely.
It's a question from Elizabeth in Denmark. If we're only doing exactly what's necessary, how do we avoid laziness or bare minimum organizations? And I think Elizabeth's getting to the point. There is a propensity for the status quo in organizations. So how do we avoid that? How do we make them more dynamic?
Okay, so doing just the absolute necessary is probably ultimately missing the point of sustainability in the long term and sustainability in the face of uncertainty. Okay, so there is this well-established concept of organizational slack. Most organizations have some forms of resources that they don't immediately need for anything, but are there just in case. So most organizations, both for-profits and nonprofits, maintain some sort of a surplus, something in store for the rainy day. And of course, you don't want to have a 100% capacity utilization at your manufacturing plant. Anyone who's taken operations management with me, and I think there may be some in the audience, know that you don't want to run your production operation at 100%, not even 95. You probably want to do it somewhere around 90 or less, because if you really spread thin in terms of your resource, even small disturbances can have a shattering effect on. Just look at what happens when you're waiting to get your coffee at a coffee shop that's incredibly busy. And then a little delay or a little mishap, and just look at the ripple effect of that. I don't know if that answered the question, but I hope it answered something.
Rick Spann from Amsterdam says, a jazz band in its continuously changing context is really efficient and adaptive, embracing variations, polyvocality, syncopation, blue notes and such. I suppose it's different sort of efficiency. And I suppose efficiency is seen as a kind of the opposite of creativity in a way. And that's that's why it's kind of it gets bad media coverage.
Yeah, I think, yeah. So efficiency, what I would think. So I'm more a fan of. I have a very interesting taste. So I listen to Mozart and Metallica. So I don't listen to jazz all that much. But if you listen to a symphony orchestra or Metallica play, there is a notion of efficiency in the sense that, and this actually goes to another fundamental concept in economics called team production. Team production. That if you look at the four members of Metallica playing together, they're specialized in doing different things, but the end result is the collaboration of the four. You take any one person out, and the end result just crumbles like the house of cards. So this idea that the end result, value creation, is a collaborative effort, and the notion of, for instance, marginal productivities. It would be meaningless to ask, what is James Hetfield's marginal productivity in the Metallica band? He's the lead singer and guitarist. The notion of marginal productivity becomes meaningless. So in that sense, yes, efficiency is specifically about collaboration, which brings me back to the unit of analysis, the relationship, Stuart, between you and me. In a symphony orchestra and in a band, the relationship between the members and the kind of the seamless collaboration. Yeah, I would say that is a manifestation of efficiency, definitely.
But don't organizations remain hopelessly siloed? I mean, you work in the academic world where silos are alive and well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm trying to think of, some of the departments at my school. I don't even know what building they're in. I'm embarrassed by this. And by the way, this is going to be recorded for posterity. So, oh my goodness, good thing I don't have children. So, yeah, so organizations do get siloed in the sense that there is a division of labor. Okay, you folks, you focus on running operations, you focus on R&D, you focus on sales and marketing. So the functional division of labor. So you create these silos. They are deliberately designed. I went to school at Iowa State, so I've actually been inside a grain silo, and it's actually pretty peaceful in there. So if you really need to focus on something, go inside a silo. And that's the whole point. But then the problem is the value creation, revenue creation. R&D units don't create revenue. They create new ideas, new technologies, maybe patents. Okay, operations, they don't generate value, they make stuff. And then, so if we look at constant revenue and profit and surplus, it requires the collaboration. And this is the silo effect, that when collaboration is called for and you can't break the silos, that's when problems begin. And yes, every single university I've ever worked for has this siloed structure, and much of the work that we do as researchers and teachers occurs within these silos. And I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I know it's a thing, but I hesitate to immediately label it as a problem.
A point from Frank Karlberg in Switzerland says, by increasing efficiency, to what extent will we get more time to work creatively?
Okay, that's good. Thank you, Frank. That's very good. So one reason why organizations want to maintain Slack is that they give room for creativity. So, 3M, I did my PhD at Minnesota, and 3M, obviously one of the best known companies there. I don't know if they still have that, but they used to have the 15% rule, that some engineers, some R&D people could spend 15% of their time doing whatever the heck they pleased. Okay, so this was Slack, deliberately designed into certain parts of the organization. So yes, for an organization to enable creativity, there has to be Slack, there has to be discretion given to organizational members. And this is where, if we criticize universities for being siloed, I would say that at least in my current employment, there is sufficient Slack given to me to look for ideas, develop ideas that I find compelling. Many of them are dead ends, but then, just keep your head up and head out onto the next thing. So in this sense, yes, Slack is absolutely essential.
There's a question from Michael in New York City. Is the focus on efficiency myopic in an environment of increasingly frequent disruption? If we double down on optimizing what we do we miss what we should be doing?
Okay, very good. Michael, a former student of mine, good to see you. So you're in New York now. So I don't know if it would be possible to keep the question up, just for a little longer. But yeah, but this idea of, myopic versus sustainable. We make this distinction I think in the preface of the book, that, yeah, there is both a myopic and a more long-term, or what we call sustainable, way of thinking at efficiency. So certainly, well, this is actually a good question to think about is in an environment with frequent disruptions, how should one think about efficiency? Because if there are a lot of disruptions, then it's really difficult to think of efficiency in the long term. Because those disruptions, they will come like COVID-19. They just out of the blue, and we never know what the magnitude of the disruption is going to be. So one of the cases that I use in my teaching in my operations class is Zara, the fast fashion company. And it's really interesting when you look at how they run their operation, they actually have a fairly short-term focus because they realize that there's a lot of uncertainty that you may need to adapt to. So in that sense, adaptation and efficiency they're not enemies. They're actually, we might actually talk about adaptive efficiency. I think that could be a thing to look into in more detail. So thank you, Michael, for that question.
Somebody on LinkedIn says efficiency has a hard and a soft cost saving. Hard savings, it saves on the bottom line.
Yes.
Soft savings frees up your time for more valuable activities like collaboration and creativity.
This is an excellent point. So when we think of when we think of forms of waste, some of them are salient. You can even do the math on them, and then others are. I wouldn't use the word soft, but I get the sentiment. But yeah, some forms of waste are difficult to pinpoint, impossible to measure, but they may sometimes be the things that you really need to be paying attention to. Here's a classic example. Let's say that in the past, I produced the seats to my automobiles myself. And then I found Stewart's company who also does this, but he specialized in making seats. So he's probably more skilled than I am. He's probably more productive. So why don't I have Stewart's company make those seats for me? Okay. So, and I might look at the production cost, internal production versus outsourcing, and I might come to the conclusion that from the point of view of production cost, I really should outsource this. But this is what I would be overlooking, and this is what a lot of companies overlook is what is the cost of managing the buyer-supplier relationship? First of all, we need a contract. Okay, and that contract may have 500 pages. Okay, needs to be drafted, needs to be vetted by lawyers on both sides. So there's an ex ante cost, but even more importantly, there's an ex post cost of enforcing that contract on a daily basis. And sometimes that transaction cost can be so significant that I'd be better off making those seats myself. But transaction costs are incredibly difficult to estimate, and they're often shoved into overhead. So they're kind of out of sight, out of mind. But they are real cost. They are real cost, and sometimes they're so significant that they would actually lead me to a different governance decision. I would make something in-house instead of outsourcing it. So excellent point from the floor. Thank you.
Magdalena from Denmark says, do you see a correlation between the general state of the brain and well-being and efficiency?
General state of the brain. Okay, so think of the last time the general state of your brain was not well. Okay, for me, it was this morning and yesterday about 5 times. Okay, well, joking aside, I think there is something we might call cognitive efficiency and cognitive slack. You know the saying, please give me some slack. Often that means give me some cognitive slack. I need time to think about this. I'm really burning the candle at both ends. So yes, I think that's an intriguing point to make. So thank you for that. So dissertation, anyone? Is anyone listening? So no, very interesting thought, but certainly I can see a connection, albeit probably a fairly complex one.
Let's talk about some of your other projects, Mikko, because the tentacles of efficiency stretch far and wide.
Yes.
One of your projects is about shareholders and what you call the shareholder paradox. Can you tell us
shareholder paradox? Yeah. Shameless marketing plug. I'm talking about this at a New Scholars event next week. So this is intriguing. So again, I want everyone to answer this question inside their heads. What do shareholders want? What do shareholders want? And here's where the paradox comes from. There is Lynn Stout, who was an American legal scholar. She said, and I think her tongue was only half planted in her cheek when she said, in many of our theories, we effectively assume that shareholder is a functional psychopath who wants one thing and one thing only, and will do anything to get that one thing, which is what? Maximizing their own wealth. Well, how do we know this? Are we functional psychopaths? I'm saying we because I own shares, and I think, Stuart, I think you might be a shareholder as well. I hope to goodness I'm not a functional psychopath. But here's an interesting thing. The last time I sit down with my broker and I was making some changes to my investment portfolio, he said to me at the end, and this was a face-to-face meeting, he said at the end, would you mind answering a couple questions? And I said, okay. So then he asked me to fill out a brief survey where he asked what I valued as an investor. And I said, this is really cool. I wish academics did this too. So can anyone in the audience who is an academic think of an empirical study that looked at what shareholders actually value and what they want? And do they chant in unison? I want just one thing, and I want it now, and that is maximal returns to my investment. I don't think that's the answer we would get, and certainly not the answer that I gave in the survey. So there's this idea that we assume to know everything there is to know about shareholders when we in reality don't really know anything about them. So let's look at this in more detail. And by the way, if you think that shareholders want the same thing, just look at the tension between preferred shareholders and common shareholders and what happens. Why don't you Google Trados, Trados litigation, and you will see common shareholders litigating the board for receiving nothing when a company was purchased by an incumbent. So there is this massive heterogeneity of shareholders. There could be several classes of shareholders, but then even if there's just one class, you have majority and minority shareholders. And do they want the same thing? I don't think so, because in most countries, we have legislation that protects the rights of minority shareholders. Why do we need that if shareholders want the same thing? My home country is Spain, but in my country birth, Finland, in the LLC law, the minority shareholder is mentioned 23 times. I checked that yesterday, 23 times. Okay, so there is a concern that something that happens in an LLC, limited liability company, might not be in the best interest of minority shareholders. So this is kind of a common theme in my current interest. Take something that looks simple, unpack it, and then convince your audience that there's a lot more to this than you thought. Okay, and this is sometimes frustrating, but this is what we need to do to get to the bottom of things.
So all shareholders aren't created equal in any way.
They are not created equal. They do not want the same thing. They have different kinds of competencies. And sometimes, if you're a student of governance, you know that the board of directors owes a fiduciary duty of loyalty and care to the corporation. Well, I don't know. You might be surprised to hear that in some jurisdictions, majority shareholders or influential shareholders also owe a fiduciary duty, which means they can't vote in the shareholders meeting the way they want to. I'm currently working with a legal scholar, Leon Anijar here at IE, and then Joe Mahoney, and we're really trying to get to the bottom of this and really understand the shareholder. I think the least understood constituency. We have a pretty good understanding of buyer-supplier relationships and employees and such. But when it comes to shareholders, there is just this very strange, overly simplistic assumption that they all want the same thing. I don't think that's true.
Let's touch on some of your other research, Mikko. How do scientists reason?
How do scientists reason? Yeah, or how do human beings reason? So, ChatGPT and all these discussions on self-driving cars and whatnot. Yeah, I'm fascinated about how human beings reason, and then putting it into the context of either a top management team, board of directors, or why don't we turn the spotlight on ourselves and ask, how do I, as a researcher, reason? And what is the role of this thing here? Is this just a giant computer that I'm just essentially computing things? And okay, so I'm not an expert. I don't know exactly what goes on here, but it is interesting to take a look at how we as scientists reason. So how do we go from empirical data, which is often what we do? We take empirical data and then we present some kind of generalizations, conclusions, policy recommendations, whatever the knowledge interests may be. But how do we get from A to B in a way that compels our audience to say, okay, I can see how Mikko got there from his data. So what are the processes, both cognitive, but there's also obviously a social aspect, or let's say a collective aspect to this. The peer review, for instance, that really is an instance of collective reasoning, right? Conversation, debate, and hey, what are the premises here? And are you sure that assumption is right? So yeah, there's, so Saku Mantere, who's a very good friend of mine and co-author, who is actually trained in philosophy, we do very different kinds of research. We've never worked on an empirical piece together, but we have found a lot of common ground in looking at how we reason. So yeah, that's something I've been doing for the last 20 years. And, I just get increasingly interested in looking into it some more.
There's a nice quote from you. Evidence is important, but the essence of an argument lies in convincing an audience through effective rhetoric. To this end, evidence is merely one ingredient.
It's one ingredient. Okay, that is, I don't know who I stole that from, but I probably did. But yeah, but this idea, so what is the notion of evidence-based management? I never liked the term evidence-based management. I think evidence-informed management would be better, but I don't think that management can be based on, it can certainly be informed. And I think same thing with policy. I don't think there is such a thing as evidence-based policy, but evidence-informed policy. But so if evidence is here and policy recommendation is here, or some kind of a conclusion, the really interesting question is what happens in the middle? And that's where I insert myself, the researcher. Data don't speak, researchers do. Data don't convince an audience, researchers do, if they're successful in rhetoric. And I'm using the word rhetoric in the most positive sense as well. It's essentially about persuasion. Yeah, so yes, evidence is absolutely essential, but it never carries you to the conclusion. That's where we need to understand the role of the researcher. So, so the very active role of the researcher.
Yeah, that's interesting because it leads on to my next quote, Mikko. You said academics must be willing to abandon our paradigms and embrace the complexity, the dilemma and ambiguity of organizational life. So what you're calling for there is kind of academics to get stuck into the practical reality and make sense of that rather than coming up with frameworks and theorizing.
Absolutely, yeah. So let me pull another quote from Oliver Williamson on this. Throughout his life that spanned, academic life that spans over 50 years, I think he was guided by one deceptively simple question. That question is, what's going on here? What's going on here? Okay, so when I go into an organization and I try to figure out, hey, what's going on here? What I'm trying to convey with that quote is that I should be willing to abandon any paradigm and Herbert Simon has made this very same point, is that do not go in with strong preconceptions about, because, if you expect to see something, you're going to see it. Okay. So, to kind of modify the old saying, I'll believe it when I see it. It's actually the other way around. I'll see it when I believe it. So that's why it's really can be dangerous to have a really strong paradigmatic basis and then look at, the saying, given a hammer, all you see are nails. So this is the same thing. So have the courage to ask what's going on here instead of saying, hey, I know what's going on here. And then be like a detective. Let the phenomenon or the data lead you wherever it's going to lead you instead of, trying to impose your own pre-understanding on it. So my biggest revelations in my professional life have stemmed precisely from that, kind of checking my paradigm at the door.
One of your long-term projects is research in Finland about the problem of collective action.
Yes.
Is that an example of the kind of academic intervention or work that you think we should see more of?
I think we should. So yeah, the work that you're referencing here is my work with two very brilliant economic historians, Juha Lamberi and Mirva Peltoniemi in Finland. It's absolutely fascinating to work with economic historians to kind of see how they think and how they're in many ways incredibly privileged because they have access to archival data and so this idea. So the thing that we looked at, and this is one of the empirical pieces in my recent past that I'm most excited about. We looked at an R&D alliance in the Finnish pulp and paper industry that lasted for 93 years, almost 100 years. And we said, hey, how on earth can an R&D, so it was a joint equity alliance that had at its peak, I think, 150 shareholders. How is it possible? And this was, by the way, from 1916 to 2009. So there's a couple disruptions there, like the Second World War, Finland's joining of the European Union. And by the way, 1916 was on the eve of Finland's independence from Russia. So how can an R&D alliance survive? So, and we said this is collective action. And this is a brilliant example of successful collective action that survived several disruptions. So we said, let's try to understand this. So this article is under review right now. We're hoping to get at least a revised and resubmit. I really hope this paper sees the light of day as soon as possible.
A nice comment from Kevin Manco. Interesting that confirmation bias is the efficiency of our brains. Thinking outside of our own belief systems is hard work.
Yes. That's excellent. Yeah, in some sense, confirmation bias gets us very quickly to the answer, but I would say that may be antithetic to efficiency if the decision we make is actually the wrong one. So it may be cognitively efficient. And that's what we do. We use heuristics all day, every day, because we want to save energy up here, right? Okay. So if you're thinking of how you're going to get home today, unless you're home already, you don't have to think of it. You already know how you're going to get there. You don't have to solve that problem every time. This is what routines get us. But the dark side of routines is that they may, over time, kind of slide out of alignment and actually become liabilities, rigidities instead of competencies.
Mikko, in terms of efficiency, to be efficient, we are out of time. Mikko's book is Efficient Organization with John Mahoney, published by Oxford University Press, out now. Where can people find out more about your work, Mikko? Where's the best place to look?
Just go to my homepage, ketokivi.com. I'm the only Ketokivi on this planet. So, I'm fairly easy to find on the internet. So it's a very long story. But yeah, I have a unique last name. So Ketokivi.com, you'll find more than what's legal about me on that homepage. And you can also download the preface for the book free from my homepage, and that you can get it for $20 from Amazon. So it's not that expensive. So
it's a bargain. It's an efficient use of your time. Mikko, thank you very much. Check out Mikko's work. It's really fascinating and a very different perspective on the world of organizations. Next week, I hope you can join us at the same time. We'll be joined by the excellent Marcus Collins, author of For the Culture, a book that's just come out.
That'll be good. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thank you very much, Mikko.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, everyone.